All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So today, this webinar is going to be about the latest developer tools. There's lots, but in the scope of this presentation, we're only going to be reviewing 5 of them. As far as questions and answers, there's a Q&A tab on the software, webinar software. I will answer questions at the end. So if you could just put them there as the presentation goes along. I can't promise I'll get to every single question, but I'll try to answer most of them if I can, time permitting. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right. So the tools I'm going to review are Bitsocket, Bitbus, the TXQ from Matterpool, the TwetchPay widget, and BitcoinFiles. So the objectives of this webinar, we're going to review these relevant tools in the Bitcoin SV ecosystem, how these tools operate, what benefits they provide, and the various use cases for them. When should one tool be used over another? I think this is a frequent thing I see pop up in the various Telegrams and Slack channels. Also, how can these tools help me make money or save money? So I'm going to get into that a little bit. And then which Bitcoin businesses are actually using these tools today? How are they using them and why are they using them? So the first one I'll talk about is Bitsocket. So what is it? It's basically server sent events. Most devs should be aware of this concept. It's basically you have a server sitting somewhere that pings a endpoint or whatever, or pings somewhere where devs can have programs listening to it. So with this, you can subscribe to any type of Bitcoin transaction. Now that we have script unlocked, you can imagine how powerful this is. So if you know that only a certain app is broadcasting a certain type of Bitcoin transaction, you can just be listening to that and get an instant notification of once that's done. You don't need any infrastructure for this. You could just run it from a web page, or you could run it on the server. It's the dev's choice here. You can get an instant notification once a certain type is transaction is broadcast, like I mentioned, but this is powerful in case you want to listen to other types of apps. So let's say you want to know when I received a Bay mail, or a certain type of Twetch was put on chain, or Twetches from a certain user. You could do all that with Bitsocket. Something I haven't really seen it used yet is a push notification service. I think this is pretty obvious. So with all the different types out there, whether they're running transactions, whether they're payments, whether they're op return outputs, you could implement some type of notifications and just push those to people's smartphones, and and react based off that. So when and how you should use it when you want to respond quickly, right? So if it's real time, this is something that you would want. If it's something where it's not time sensitive, then Bitsocket is probably not for you. Now, it can be used as a type of ingestion tool. So if you want to know as soon as it's broadcast, you want to know about it, and then you can save it to a BB or something like that. And then you could use it if you don't necessarily want to run a backend. So I know that's something that's people have thought about, and that's kind of a buzzword with Google lately, and Amazon is serverless applications. So that's something that's possible. So here's a code and example of it. Very simple. You could just listen for all Bay mail transactions. So a person who is using it is Bay mail. So as soon as a Bay mail is sent, they insert that data into a local database, they decrypt it, and they ensure that the message displays in the recipient's inbox. Degan also validates that he's getting a payment. So that's one way for him to deal with this, is that because he has all the transaction details that he wants, he can just validate, oh, I got the output to myself. Okay, this is a valid Bay mail. So, this is an archaic example. I'm just listening for the protocol prefix of the BAE, but you could do, payments to myself, payments to someone else, any type of transaction, any type of script. All right, the next tool I'll get into is Bitbus. So Bitbus is a bit different in that it stores the entire Bitcoin ledger. So Unwriter's running this server somewhere where he has the whole ledger indexed, and he's able to serve it over HTTP. So you just make requests to it, and then you get a filtered set of transactions back. And the great thing about this is you can use it from any programming language. So it's not limited to JavaScript. You just simply follow his instructions out there on his documentation, which is really good. You make requests, and then you just get your filtered data set in the response. So you could use this without a server if you wanted to, just from a web page, or you could use it with a server and store the data. Maybe you query every hour or something for the latest transactions. And it uses the BigQuery language just like Bitsocket does. So if you're using Bitsocket, you know how to use Bitbus. So when and how you want to confirm, if you want to query for confirmed transactions, you would use this block endpoint. If you want the unconfirmed ones, then you use this crawl endpoint. So all the confirmed ones will be, you want to come here. And if you want stuff that hasn't been confirmed yet, it'll be here. Now, a caveat here is it only stores transactions over the last 24 hours, meaning that it's rolling. So like once it's been 25 hours, the transaction's gone. So you're going to have to do some management with this if you're using the combination of Bitbus and Bitsocket. So I want to talk about that here. So instead of code, I want to talk about an example. So one thing I've seen frequently brought up is how do you get unconfirmed and confirmed without duplicates? So a construct in programming is a set. So sets enforce uniqueness even if you insert duplicates. So this is one way you could deal with the problem is if the TX hash is your index, which we know is unique, then if you're making queries against both endpoints that I talk about here, and you put those into a set maybe before you commit them to the DB, there's your uniqueness, and you just eliminated all duplicates. So I mentioned that here. You join the query, and then you can solve that problem without doing too much crazy coding. So who is using Bitbus? So Oyo.cash and Trends.cash would talk about various stats on the network. They use it, and they purposely run this to avoid running a full node. Despite how many times Satoshi has to say it, we still have people doing it. And I think the tools are finally coming out that are really just making it pointless. So the reason is decreased server costs and risk, right? So obviously your server requirements are going to be way lower just making periodic calls and inserting data than it is running that mining software. All right, moving on. This is the latest tool, so TXQ. So what this is really more, I think, where the ecosystem wants to go, where we're running more lean types of machines that have data relevant to us versus trying to keep the whole ledger. It just makes sense, right? Like if we wouldn't store the whole internet on a server, so why would we store the whole blockchain on a server? So with this, it's an index local copy of transactions for an application. Now, that doesn't mean it's limited to. So let's say if it was Twetch, right? They could use this for all their transactions, but maybe there's some other stuff that's relevant to them, like BitcoinFiles transactions. So they could store those as well. The biggest point I think this thing makes is using the raw transaction as a communication method for data between services. So the raw TX has everything we need. We got libraries that can serialize that out, that can interpret it and save data. And this is the way that peer-to-peer is really supposed to work. Is we're supposed to be sending raw transactions back and forth between each other, modifying them, extracting the data off, and then finally broadcast them at the end. So instead what most things do is it just broadcasts the transaction and gives you the raw TX. But that's like just giving you what happened after the fact, which isn't really helpful. I mean, it is to a degree, but this makes the point that this is how we really want to do it. And this would actually be a payment channel implementation, is if we're passing this around and malleating it, storing it without broadcasting, that is a payment channel, which is kind of a buzzword that's been talked about for years, but no one's implemented it yet. I think this tool, while it's not a payment channel implementation, it could be used to implement one. With this, it does require a backend database, so that's kind of different from the Bitbus and the Bitsocket, whereas they don't necessarily require it. They could be used with it, whereas this one, you need it. And it supports spent indexes. So for NFTs, Run, which is coming soon, it is in alpha, so you can use it if you want to, and any type of color coin. So meaning that you could keep track of the UTXOs in order to support those various types of transactions. So I mentioned this before, use Bitcoin as Satoshi's been shilling for almost 11 years now. You take the raw transaction, you store it in a database, then you broadcast it to miners, not the other way around. You don't send it to all the miners and then tell people about it after the fact. It is the opposite of approach of the unwriter tools. That's not a jab, it's just a statement. Like I said, sometimes you do want to listen to transactions after they're broadcasted. There's use cases for that. There's use cases for wanting to get it before you broadcast it. All right, I'll come back to TXQ when I talk more about the summary and the use cases of these tools. All right, let's talk about TwetchPay. Oh, let me come back real quick. I don't have code example or who's using it because this was just released maybe a week or two ago. All right, let's talk about TwetchPay. So it's just a slick payment UI. So out of the box, it supports Money Button RelayX, and they just updated their documentation with maxed on VBox. I don't know too much about that, and I haven't played around with it, but I have used it for Money Button and RelayX. So the great thing about this is it abstracts both wallets, APIs. That way you don't have to do separate implementations for Money Button and RelayX. So what it does is, because there's uniform response objects, right? So I get pay mail, I get the transaction hash. There's no need to write different software for both of those. So no matter how the user pays, you just you get the same response back, regardless if there was a relay swipe or a Money Button swipe. You can also easily support complex scripts, and you can avoid using these low-level implementations. So how do you use TwetchPay? Like I said, you want to support multiple wallets without the dev effort. You want exposure to the different pay mails, and all those attributes are accessible on the swipe. And you can work around implementing login systems with these details. So because you get, say, pay mail or the public key on the callback, maybe you don't have to implement a OAuth login system or a user password login system, or God forbid, a Google or Twitter login system. Because if they're signing new transactions and giving you money, you don't need to ask them for all this weird information. So a simple code example, this is super easy to use. You just include the script tag at the top of your web page, and you twetchpay.pay, and then you can set your outputs, and you specify the Satoshi amount. It supports all that other stuff. It's in the documentation. I have a link. I can put a link to that in the chat once I'm done, but it's super easy. So who's using TwetchPay? Lots of people. So Twetch, BoostPal, BitcoinFiles, and this tutorial site I launched. No vendor lock-in, meaning you're not limiting your users to only use one type of wallet. You're letting them use multiple. And then, like I mentioned here, users can interact with your site easily without adding and providing all this additional information, just like the white paper says on the first page. All right, BitcoinFiles. So what is BitcoinFiles? So it's an API to post files on chain. That's hardly new, right? I mean, we've been able to do that for quite some time now, since the beginning of last year. But this is the cleanest and most user-friendly interface I've seen to do it. So it supports files up to 10 megabytes, which is a challenge given the mining efforts right now. But like I said, it's a great interface to interact with files. So the way they're able to deal with this, I wrote an article recently, is they kind of store it locally in their server, and then they kind of let miners come pick at it. So while, yes, it may not be on chain for some time if it really is 10 megabytes, they'll kind of have it in a queue for miners to come, and maybe they want to say, hey, I'm going to try to mine this and collect all the fees from it. And because there's a reference hash and that's publicly available, you can reference that even if it's not on the chain. The coolest thing I think about this is that there's a virtual folder to support and organize your files. So you can create as many of these as you want, and there's not really labeling or anything like that yet, but you can add files to your share link and then easily have it all in one place versus having to keep a local copy of transaction hashes or something like that. It's monetization opportunity with Twetch and RetroTwetch, and the reason is because if I have a file that's on chain, then I can just I can post a link in other places and reference it. So maybe I want to post a meme on January and it's relevant. Well, if it's relevant again in July, I don't want to have to upload it again, right? I just post that reference hash to it, and if it's relevant, people will like it, and I'll make some more Bitcoins. I think this the chain itself, but it has the potential to be the most valuable file repository ever due to the economics, right? So I talked about this in the article. No one's going to pay $2 to upload a huge photo unless they think it's valuable. They're not just going to do it for spam. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm only going to do it if I feel like it's going to benefit me in the long run. So maybe I can make money from Twetch on it, or maybe I can use it in some app or whatever. So I think, this is it's just a nice repository that a lot of people should integrate, because I know it's being widely used, especially within Twetch. All right, so they have a great API for it, so you can easily broadcast files to the ledger, and you can associate your session tag, which is your virtual folder. So you can just be adding files to it if you want to. So this is it. This is a code snippet in JavaScript, but you could do it in any programming language because it's just HTTP calls. So who is using BitcoinFiles, Twetch, and RetroTwetch? As you can see, someone posted a GIF on here. You got 3 likes and a branch from it. Okay, so instead of iterating through the tools, now I'm going to just talk about how these kind of mesh together and what's the reason we should use these and what benefits do they provide. Okay, so a big thing is we want to leverage existing infrastructure. So none of us want to write low-level tools. We don't want the technical debt associated. We don't want the opportunity cost of, okay, why am I building this low-level thing when I could be building what I'm good at and what I really want to build? So they save dev time, right? Because server-side events are built, I have a query to go get my transactions. I don't need to build that stuff myself, meaning that's instead of me investing capital in devs to go do that work, I can just use what someone else already did. I can conserve on infrastructure costs, right? I don't need to run a node. I don't need to run all this crazy software in AWS. I can run something very lean that just gets me what I need. It's a learning opportunity, right? If I'm using these different tools, I'm learning with the ecosystem, which probably means I'm talking with the ecosystem. So this kind of means that you have the line of communication open with people, and you can also learn some basic stuff about programming. Like, I think I've learned so much how to code over the last year or so because I've been playing around with all these tools. Again, trying to keep hammering home, don't need to run a full node, right? It's just taking that away. And I think it's useful that if you're going to start building an app, you want to review all the existing tools before you start development. So you don't want to head down a single path and then change it later because, oh, someone already built this for me. Like, that would be really bad. That would just be a complete waste of time. The tooling can help jumpstart your app. So all the pieces can be in place such that your app can just go. You can just specialize in what you want. I know that's a concept that's been talked about, is specialization. I really do think that when people use their talents to build these things that do the work for us, we can leverage that and really focus on what we're good at. And you keep the line of communication open with other Bitcoin businesses, which is good because you know what they're working on and you know what they think is important. So that way you don't fork yourself off the network just like a miner would. You don't find yourself on the edge because you're not talking to people. If you're talking to people, you understand what's good, what's not good, what's valuable, what's not. All right, so here's some examples of the various tools. So if you're the sole processor of an application, so here an example is Baymail, you could use TXQ to just simply accept raw transactions, right? So I don't mean to poke fun at Degan or talk bad about him. I'm just giving an example. But if you're the only one that's reading Baymails, there's no reason for you to look at the chain after the fact, right? Because if you're the one that's dictating how this works, you should accept them, you should validate them, and then you put them on the chain. Because you're the sole processor. It wouldn't make sense if there are multiple processors, right? If there's multiple people ingesting the same data, then it should go on the chain first instead of it being on some centralized server first and then relying on them, because that's how the old internet works. But so it just really depends on the use case. So I have the point, if you need to access after it's broadcast, then Bitsocket and or Bitbus is better than TXQ. But like Twetch, Baymail, I think it makes sense for them to use TXQ because that way they can deal with the raw TX, do whatever they want with it, and then they can put it on the chain. Because honestly, it doesn't matter, right? If the hash is, if there's a hash to reference it and the data's there, and I can like the Twetch, I don't care if it's on chain today. I mean, sorry, in this hour. It doesn't really matter for 2 hours, right? I mean, everyone's using Twetch. They're not referencing Twetch on other places. So it does, as long as it makes it to the chain at some point. Now, if there's alternative Baymail clients, those could use Bitbus or Bitsocket to read after the fact, right? Because if Degan is kind of the arbiter, then they would just let him do the processing, and then someone else could, maybe they're reading his database or something like that. It's just, like I said, depends on the use case. If you want to support multiple wallets, use TwetchPay, right? Don't implement Relay and Money Button separately. And you know, TwetchPay, it has the button swipe, so it just depends on your use case, right? We're moving towards the invisible buttons, but I still think swipes have use cases, especially for larger payments. If you want to reference different files on chain, I think BitcoinFiles is the way to go because of the UI, and I think that's where normies are going to upload files. Like, most people aren't writing their own programs if they just want to put a file on chain, right? They're going to just go and hit the plus sign and upload a file just like you do on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. You never need to write your own custom file upload tool. Like, we have APIs for that. It's just something that doesn't really need to be done. All right, profit seeking. So how does these things actually make you save or make money? So I've talked about the serverless buzzword, but it really does, right? I mean, we can deploy web pages to where we don't really need to run full-fledged backends, depending on how lean the app can be. So if you can fetch your data from these endpoints, you don't need to necessarily run a database. You can save money on those backends, and your operational cost is lower, thus your risk is lower. The TwetchPay, I mean, you can start paying people on different outputs, right? So one thing I kind of want to see is, I haven't seen yet, I think Twetch does a little bit of this, is depending on the function that's done, that could pay different people, right? So maybe when there's a like, that pays the dev who built the like. If there's a branch, that pays the dev or devs who built the branch, right? And I have that example here, right? So, and maybe you have an archive function, and that would pay the other dev. So like, that could all be functioning on the same site. We want to take advantage of that valuable file repository. And as I mentioned before, users are only going to pay those prohibitive upload costs if the file actually has some value. And then we can reference those files throughout the ecosystem. Honestly, I think almost every single Bitcoin app should support BitcoinFiles. There's no reason not to, because it's just, I think it's where most people are putting stuff on chain. And then with the files, there's no need for redundancy, right? So you write once, read many. So this is something that Craig's talked about, and especially with the proof of existence stuff. We don't want to be uploading the same file multiple times. That's how the old internet works, right? That's how Twitter, Facebook. If you want to, you can't like reference your old thing. Yeah, you can retweet it, but sometimes you just want to post the reference, right? To just, you know, in the moment. You don't want to have to go back and search, and you just want somewhere to go to look at this stuff. That's something that's yours too. That's the other thing. Is these share links, as long as if you don't actually give them to anybody, they're private. So no one's mining your data like Google. They're not like looking at, oh, they're posting all these files. You know, then they can show you ads while you're, you know, next time you're on your phone doing something and you see something just because you uploaded a file that one time. Okay, so the possibilities. So when I launched a site to fund my tutorials, it was a single HTML page with 5 different services. And I think this is the kind of point I'm trying to drive home here, is that we can have a single web page that integrates 5 different things because of the work that other people have already done. The Relay, Baymail, Boost, Twetch, and Money Button. So, you know, if something like this can be done on one page, I think the possibilities for full-fledged apps that are way more robust and way more complex are really unbounded. All right, so these are sources and references, and I can post any of these links that you guys need. So now I will start taking some questions. So the first question was TXQ interoperability if the data processing moves off chain. Okay, so I think here the point I was trying to make is that it has to end up on chain at some point. So you could have 5 different services passing the raw TX around and extracting whatever they need. But in the end, as long as it does make it on the chain, then all those other services can still leverage it. I hope that answers the question. Is Bitsocket configurable with any cryptocurrency to get transactions? As far as I know, it only supports Bitcoin SV. Why is TXQ the opposite of Unwriter's tools? Yeah, I just think from a development perspective, I would approach it kind of the opposite, because you have to run a server. Whereas with Unwriter stuff, you don't necessarily have to. So maybe opposite wasn't the right word. It's more of, well, yeah, all Unwriter stuff, you all have to react after it's on chain. Whereas TXQ, I think you want to deal with stuff before it gets to the chain. Okay, how is profit made from BitcoinFiles? So today, it's only made through posting it on, say, Twitch or whatever, or posted on some, I don't know, any other popular social media apps. But I've seen people post GIFs and they get like 20 likes on Twitch, that's $1, right? So if it only costs you 2 cents to post a file, you just made 98 cents. It's not a pay-per-view thing. I think that could come. That would be really interesting. And the integration with TwetchPay, that's more of how you upload it versus it being like a centralized thing. What services do you think we need the most? I think we need wallets to start giving us the raw transaction. I think that's the biggest thing, and implement the SIG hash flags. Once we do that, I think a lot of apps can take off and start flying. I also think that's why a lot of apps are slow, is because it's having to read the chain after versus just taking. If you're coding, HTTP requests are fast, right? The reason all these other apps are slow is because they're having to get the HTTP request, wait for someone else to put it on the chain, wait for it to hit somebody else's node, and then read it. That's super slow, and it doesn't make any sense. It should just take the raw transaction, parse it out, broadcast it. Because that broadcast part, the user doesn't care. We're making the user wait for the broadcast, which it doesn't matter. The user they don't care if it goes on the chain or not. All they care about is if they can see the data on their screen, right? So it doesn't make sense for us to wait until it propagates across the network. And then we say, okay, here, user, your Twitch is on chain. Or here, user, you sent your payment. We just got to reverse that. I mean, no matter how many people keep talking about it, we still haven't seen it, right? So I think that's the biggest thing we need. Is there a way to know the UTXOs without an API request? Yes, that's hard to say. Today, that's be difficult unless you manage them locally. So all the wallets are kind of keeping their own nodes or whatever. And you would have to ask them for the UTXOs. But yeah, unless you are managing them yourself, yeah, I don't think that's possible right now. What services, tools for Bitcoin script would be useful? What Libitix just came out with the Pay Presto. So he allows funding of any arbitrary Bitcoin transaction from a QR code, which I think is pretty cool. So once we we're getting there. I think this was a problem maybe a few months ago. I think it's less of a problem now. We're starting to see Money Button and Relay support different types of scripts. And once we kind of break the mentality of standard and non-standard scripts, which I think is happening by the day, then those wallets allowing us to support those will be really nice. So it'll be up to the devs at this point to implement the Bitcoin script, but we're starting to see where people are just putting custom scripts on chain that do all kinds of weird stuff. I hope that answered that question. Do you know the percentage of file duplicates across the global memory storage? If one node is offline, how can one reference the same metadata in a file? So I do not know the duplicates. I did see something interesting pop up. It was called prove.network. I'll type that in the chat. Where you could prove the existence of a file, which I think we should really have that. We should be like testing against that, because if I'm a user, I don't want to pay 10 cents to upload a file that someone else already did. I would be really mad if I had to do that. You know, someone had just posted it maybe a month ago. And if Node is offline, that's why I was talking about how BitcoinFiles keeps them locally before, like they keep it separately kind of from the ledger. So if we're using like we could be using a centralized server. It doesn't really matter, because if the hash, it gives us what we need, right? It doesn't really, Craig talks about this all the time. It's not the actual content, it's the hash, right? If I have a hash and if it's on some server that's not even connected to Bitcoin, but I could take that hash and put it and say what's on chain, and I get the same output, I know it's valid. So it doesn't really matter. I don't need that to be reflective of the data on chain. I just need it to say, oh, this was it, and it's proof of existence, and then I can get the data somewhere else. When do you think we will see storage nodes or miners ask a fee for retrieving op return through their data? I think soon we'll see that be tested out. That's an interesting idea, to see if that's valuable or not. Given that it's already too expensive to upload files, I find it hard to believe that will take off today. I think in the future it could be. I think we need more transactions before we see this be a viable business model. So here's another one. What do you think of miners proving data? Will miner API have retention terms? Yeah, I think that'll be interesting. I don't think miners will prune valuable data. I think there will always be one miner who's smart enough to keep everything, and they'll just make that available, and then they'll make all the money come to them. Miner API someone could customize it to have explicit terms. That's a pretty interesting idea. But pruning, I think some miners will do it. I don't think those will be the most profitable ones. I think the most profitable miners will be the ones that keep it and conserve it and monetize it somehow. I don't know where to start, but I wanted to put on blockchain every building material. We should know what is counterfeit. Yeah, check out that prove.network. And that can like proof existence at a time. It hashes a file. And I think that can just prove that it existed, and people can check that pretty easily because it's just math, right? All right, I'll take the last one. No more after this, seriously. What is the uptime of Bitsocket? Are there any restrictions in the volume of API requests? What will be the future cost? Okay, the uptime, it's dubious, right? I know there were problems with the last stress test with it. So it's hard to say what the uptime is. I think in general it's pretty reliable, but there has been issues with it. Are there any restrictions? Technically, there's no restrictions, but there's basically soft restrictions if it's susceptible to the network volume, if that makes sense. And what could be the future cost? Well, it's free right now, so there's no cost, which I think is problematic because a business can't really rely on something that's free. But it is useful, so I think that's just the reality of it right now. Okay, guys, that's it for my presentation. If you could let me know any feedback on social media or reaching out to me directly, that'd be great. And I hope I answered everyone's questions. All right, thanks.